Jason had never seen anything like this place before. The sky above was purple. The buildings floated in the air, and aliens of all shapes walked by. He stood on the edge of the trade plaza. Holding his small tool bag, he was just a repair worker. From Earth, here for a short job on the spaceport's power grid. He didn't expect anything special. He just wanted to finish his shift, get paid, and go home to his tiny room on the station. Then he saw her. She was walking through the crowd like she didn't care about anyone. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver under the strange sunlight. Her eyes glowed a soft blue. Her long hair waved. Behind her, like light itself, even the aliens moved out of her way without being told. Jason's hand froze halfway to his lunch, and his mouth stayed open. She looked at him, directly, like she had picked him out of the entire crowd. Jason quickly turned away, pretending to fix the nearest panel. His heart was beating too fast. He told himself not to stare. But his eyes kept going back to her. Then she walked up to him. She stopped just a foot away, tilting her head slightly. "You're a human," she said, her voice calm and musical. Jason blinked. "Yeah," he said, wiping his oily hands on his pants. She looked him over like he was a strange piece of art. "I've never met one before," she said. "You look soft." Jason almost dropped his wrench. Was that an insult or a compliment? He didn't know. Thanks, I think," he said, smiling nervously. "I'm Jason," he added, holding out a hand. She looked at his hand like she had never seen one before, then shook it lightly. "I'm Yavira," she said, her fingers cold but smooth. For the next hour, she stayed with him. She asked about Earth, about what rain feels like, what chocolate tastes like. Jason tried to explain everything in simple words. He even offered her a protein bar. She sniffed it, then took a small bite. She smiled. And that smile made Jason feel like the universe had just paused. They sat on the edge of the plaza, watching the ships come and go. Yavira laughed when Jason told her stories about his clumsy childhood. Jason was amazed how easy it felt, like talking to an old friend. But in the corner of the plaza, someone was watching. A tall figure in black armor stood in the shadows, arms crossed, eyes locked on Jason. Jason didn't notice him. Yavira did, but said nothing. When it was time to leave, she stood up and said, "Same place. Tomorrow?" Jason nodded quickly. Yeah, I'll be here." He couldn't believe his luck. She gave him one last glance, then disappeared into a glowing transport pod. As Jason walked back to his room, he felt lighter than air. He whistled a happy tune and smiled at every stranger he passed. He even ignored the dirty look some aliens gave him. He didn't care. He had a date tomorrow with a girl who didn't seem real, but in a high tower not far from the plaza. Yavira stood before a massive throne. A deep voice echoed in the chamber. "You met the human today." Yavira nodded without fear. "Yes." "Father," the armored figure stepped into the light. Face covered with sharp steel. He was Lord Craven, warlord of the Eastern Nebula. "Do not play with weak creatures," he said coldly. "They break too easily." Yavira stared at him without blinking. "He is not weak," she said, her voice firm. Craven didn't respond right away. He just turned toward the massive screen behind him, which showed Jason walking into his room. "Then let us test him," Craven said quietly. "Let us see how strong your little human really is." The next morning, Jason woke up to loud banging on his door. Before he could speak, armored soldiers stormed in and grabbed him. "Hey, what is this?" he shouted. No answer came. He was dragged through the halls, across a landing pad, and into a dark ship. The engines roared as the ship lifted off. Jason's heart raced, his mind screamed. Where was he going? What was happening? And most of all, where was Yavira? Jason couldn't see anything through the dark visor they put over his eyes. He didn't know how long he had been flying. But he knew one thing: he wasn't on the trade planet anymore. The ship landed with a heavy thud. Metal doors opened, and a strange heat hit his face like a wall. Rough hands dragged him out, his feet stumbling across rough ground. Then the visor came off. The sky was burning orange, and giant moons hovered close above. Alien soldiers stood in perfect lines across a rocky training field. Every one of them was taller, stronger, faster than him. And every one of them turned to stare at the lone human in chains. A voice barked orders in a sharp alien tongue. Jason was pushed to the ground, and a sharp boot pressed against his back. They threw a uniform at him, strange armor that didn't fit quite right. He didn't understand what was happening. Why was he here? Why was he being treated like a soldier? The last thing he remembered was Javira's smile. And now this. Later that night, he sat alone on a cold bunk in a tiny tent. Other recruits laughed in the distance, speaking in alien languages. He had no friends here. No one even wanted to look at him. The food was cold and smelled like rubber. He forced it down anyway. When lights went out, Jason stared at the dark. Ceiling above, his thoughts were full of her Javira, with her glowing eyes and soft voice. Did she know he was gone? Did she care? Or was it all a joke to her, a fun game with a simple human back on the royal moon? Javira stood at the edge of her balcony. Her hands gripped the stone rail, her eyes watching the stars beyond. She had tried to contact Jason, but his come signal was gone. She knew her father had done something, and she knew why. He was testing the boy. Javira entered her father's chamber without knocking. Lord Craven stood in front of a giant war map, moving icons with his metal fingers. "You sent him away," she said, her voice low but steady. Craven didn't turn around. "He is a human," he replied, "and you are not a child. I want to see him." She said, "No." Craven said firmly, "Let him prove his worth first, and if he dies—" She asked. Craven turned slowly, eyes cold behind his helmet. "Then he was not meant to stand beside my daughter back on the training world." Jason was already bruised and limping by the second day. They made him run through sharp lava stones. With no boots, he had to dodge spinning blades while climbing steep walls. If he fell, he got shocked by electric rods. If he stopped, he got kicked. No one showed him kindness. One of the alien soldiers laughed and called him skinbag. Another pushed him face first into mud during drills. Jason didn't fight back, not yet. He waited, he studied, he learned their movements, their timing, their weak spots. One night, as he sat under the stars, rubbing his sore arms, a small box was slipped under his tent flap. Jason opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a protein bar, but there was something more. A tiny folded note hidden inside the wrapper. The note said only 3 words: "I believe still, his." Eyes widened, his chest tightened. It was her. Javira had found a way to send him a message. He read the words again and again. Like a lifeline, he wasn't alone. She hadn't forgotten him. That was the night everything changed. Jason stood up, clenched the note in his fist, and looked out into the dark. If they wanted him to fight, then he would fight, but not for them, not for honor, not for war. For her, only her. He tied the note around his wrist and returned to the training yard. Everyone else was sleeping, but Jason began running. Again and again around the field, barefoot, bleeding, pushing himself past the pain. By sunrise, he had already done more than any of them, and far away. Lord Craven watched it all on a glowing screen in his private chamber. He saw the human boy running alone in the dark. A rare smile touched the corner of his lips. "This will be interesting," he said softly. Jason didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he was ready for it now. They took him from her. Now he would fight to earn the right to stand by her side again. Jason stood face to face with a monster made of rock and fire. It roared at him 4 times his size, spitting ash and glowing with heat. His arms shook, his legs ached, and his mind screamed. But he didn't move, not even when the others ran. This was his test. They had thrown him into the gauntlet. A deadly trial for elite soldiers. Everyone expected him to die in the first minute. No human had ever lasted more than a few seconds here. But Jason wasn't going to die. Not today, not before seeing Javira again. He grabbed a broken spear from the ground. It was barely a weapon, more like a stick with a sharp edge. The monster charged, the ground shaking under its heavy feet. Jason waited until the last second, then jumped aside and rolled. Heat licked his skin, but he didn't stop. He stabbed the spear into the beast's leg and ran. The crowd above, full of alien soldiers, gasped. No one expected the human to survive that first hit. Jason ran up the rocky wall, leaping from ledge to ledge. The monster swiped at him, missing by inches. Jason reached a metal chain hanging from a broken pillar. He swung around it, landed on the beast's back, and drove the broken spear into the creature's glowing neck. The monster roared one last time, then crashed to the ground. Silence filled the air. Then came the cheers, alien voices, clapping hands, and stomping feet. Jason stood, chest heaving, covered in dirt and smoke. That night, no one called him Skin. Bag, the same aliens who had mocked him now, offered him food and nodded in respect. A red-scaled warrior clapped him on the back and said, "Not bad." Human. Jason smiled faintly, but inside he was still burning. This was just the beginning, deep underground. In the Warbase command room, Jason's performance was being played on a loop. Lord Craven stood watching, arms folded, saying nothing. One of his officers said, "He should have died," Craven replied. "Then he wouldn't be worth my daughter's time." Javira watched the same footage from her secret screen. She saw Jason's every move, every bruise, every moment of pain. Her heart ached. But her eyes were proud. She whispered, "That's my human." In the days that followed, Jason became something else. He trained harder than anyone, slept less, and learned faster. When they shot energy blasts, he learned to dodge. When they handed him weapons, he learned to fight. When they threw him into harsh environments, he learned to adapt. One test dropped him in a frozen crater where storms howled nonstop. Another put him underwater with no breathing gear. Jason failed at first, over and over, but he kept getting up. He never gave up, and slowly, the others began to follow him. By the end of the week, Jason wasn't just surviving, he was leading. During a mission simulation, he saved 2 recruits from a cave collapse. He used only a broken beam and sheer will. His hands were torn, his back strained. But he didn't stop until they were free. The commander gave him a rare nod and said, "You have something strange inside you, human." Jason replied, "It's not strange, it's love." No one understood what he meant, but they saw it. In his eyes, Jason carved a symbol on the side of his bunk, every night just 3 curved lines. The same mark that was painted on Javira's necklace. It reminded him of why he was still alive, why he had to keep going, why he couldn't fail. Meanwhile, Craven's political enemies whispered in the shadows, "If his daughter chooses a human, it weakens his bloodline," they said. "If the human survives, what message does that send?" Craven silenced them with a single word: wait. The next morning, Jason was summoned for a new mission. No one told him what it was, only that it was dangerous and top secret. He boarded a black ship with no windows and only silence. As the ship lifted off, he gripped the seat tightly. In his mind, he pictured Javira's face, her eyes, her voice. He whispered, "I'm coming back, just wait for me." And somewhere, on the other side of the galaxy, Javira stood beneath a starlit sky. She looked up, closed her eyes, and whispered the same words back. Just wait for me. The guards didn't know she could move like that. Not Javier, the royal daughter who always walked with grace and silence. But now, her blade moved through the air like lightning. She knocked the staff from her trainer's hands and spun behind him. Her long hair whipped past his shoulder as she whispered, "Too slow." The alien guard looked stunned, then laughed nervously. Yavira stepped back and lowered her weapon, her chest rising with each breath. She had been training in secret for weeks, learning the arts her father never wanted her to know. She didn't want to be a princess anymore. She wanted to fight, to move, to do something, because Jason was out there, bleeding, struggling, surviving. She had tried every back channel, every contact in the royal archives. Jason's location was buried under military codes, hidden by her father's direct orders. She had even hacked into her father's private comm terminal twice. But still, she found nothing, until tonight, one of her guards, a quiet, old friend named Raish, slipped her a single chip. No words, just a nod. The chip held coordinates to a war training zone classified. Off record, she stared at the screen, heart pounding. It had to be him, her Jason. She didn't sleep that night. She packed a stealth suit, a plasma blade, and a small tracking beacon before sunrise. She stole a low-signal transport craft and blasted off, no goodbye, no message to her father. She didn't care about rules anymore. She only cared about him on the other side of the stars. Jason stood inside a dark canyon. The Black Ops mission had turned into a trap. Half his squad was dead, the rest scattered. Enemy drones buzzed above the rocks like hungry insects. His leg was cut, his left shoulder burned. But his grip on the blaster never wavered. He dragged himself behind a fallen boulder. His breath sharp and fast, blood mixed with dust on his cheek. He didn't know if backup was coming. He didn't even know if anyone back at base knew he was alive, but he kept going, for her. Always for her. As Jason crawled up the ridge, he heard something strange, a soft humming, like a low whistle. Then a shadow landed in front of him, fast as a blink. He raised his weapon, but froze. It was her, Javira, dressed in dark armor, eyes glowing in the night. She looked at him with a mix of relief and fury. "You idiot." She whispered, "You're half dead." Jason blinked, thinking he was hallucinating Javira. He breathed. She knelt beside him and touched his face. "You really didn't die," she said softly. "Not yet," he said with a broken smile. "Then get up," she said, helping him to his feet. "We're getting out of here." The escape was chaos. Javira moved like a shadow, cutting down to enemy drones with ease. Jason fired from behind her, limping but determined. They reached a cave system and slipped inside as explosions rocked the surface. Dust filled the air, but their hands never let go of each other inside the cave. Jason collapsed to the ground, gasping. Javira tore open a med pack and started patching his wounds. He stared at her through the pain. "You came for me," he whispered. "I should have come sooner," she replied. He shook his head. "You came at the perfect time, back in the palace." Lord Craven stood before a silent war table. His advisors whispered in panic. "Your daughter is gone," one said. "She stole a ship and crossed military space." Another added. Craven raised a hand and silenced them. He already knew. He had allowed the chip to be stolen. He had allowed Raish to act. He had planned everything. "She went to find him," one general said. Craven nodded slowly. "And now we'll see what they become," he said quietly. In the cave, Jason sat with his back to the wall. Javira leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak for a while. The silence between them said more than words ever could. Finally, Jason said, "They'll come after us." "I know," Javira whispered. "You might lose everything." "I already lost you once," she said. "I'm not losing you again." Jason stared into the shadows ahead. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more danger, more running. But tonight, in that cave, with her beside him, he felt stronger than ever before. And somewhere high above, in the dark sky, a drone floated silently. Its camera lens zoomed in on the couple hidden below. Data streamed back to Lord Craven's chamber. The warlord watched with sharp eyes and whispered to himself, "Let them think they are free, but this is only the beginning." The sky turned red behind them. Jason didn't look back. He just kept running, holding Javira's hand like his life depended on it. Because maybe it did. Sirens echoed through the alien forest. Drones zipped through the trees like angry hornets. Searching, scanning, hunting. Jason's feet bled from the sharp ground. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not while she was still beside him. Yavira didn't complain, didn't slow down. She ran like she had nothing left to lose. They reached the edge of a cliff and dropped behind jagged rocks. Jason's chest heaved, his face soaked in sweat and dirt. Javira's eyes glowed faintly as she scanned the sky. "They're close," she whispered. Jason nodded, gripping the old blaster he had taken from a fallen soldier. "This was supposed to be a rescue," he said. "Now we're running for our lives." Javira leaned her back against his, both of them watching opposite directions. "I'd rather run with you." "Then sit safe in a golden cage," she said. Jason looked at her with tired eyes. "You sure?" She smiled, even through the fear. "I've never been more sure." But they weren't alone in the forest. Something else had picked up their scent. Not drones, not soldiers, something wild, something ancient. The trees grew quiet, the air heavier. A distant growl echoed through the woods. Jason froze. "That's not one of Craven's machines," he said quietly. Javira's grip on her blade tightened. "We need to move," she said. Now they fled through the trees again, but the forest had changed. Vines reached out like fingers, branches snapped behind them without wind, and glowing yellow eyes blinked from the darkness. Jason had heard the stories about the wild zones, places abandoned after the war. Filled with creatures born of radiation and madness, no one returned from them. No one, a beast, dropped from the trees in front of them, its mouth open sideways, full of jagged teeth. Jason fired without thinking, hitting it in the leg. It screeched and vanished into the shadows. Yavira grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a crumbled stone building hidden beneath the roots. It was an old bunker, half buried and leaking with rust. They slipped inside just as more growls echoed outside. The door sealed with a hiss. Jason collapsed against the wall, gasping. Javira lit a small light crystal and looked around. Old weapons, broken screens, and a dusty flag with the symbol of Craven's ancient army. "This place is older than both of us," Jason whispered, "but it might save us." She said. Hours passed, and the sounds outside finally faded. Jason sat with his legs stretched out, Yavaru beside him. He glanced at her, then at the bandage wrapped around his arm. "You didn't have to come for me," he said again. She didn't answer right away. Then she turned to him, her voice soft. "I didn't come for you." She said, "I came with you." Jason's heart ached at her words. He reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't pull away. They sat in silence, holding each other, outside. The world hunted them, but inside, for just a moment. They had peace. That peace didn't last. An emergency beacon hidden in the bunker blinked to life. Jason tried to shut it off, but it was too late. A signal had been sent, a distress call, and someone had received it in orbit above the planet. General Avarice stood on the bridge of a destroyer ship. The message blinked on his screen, and his eyes narrowed. He knew that code. It belonged to the human recruits, the one Craven had placed so much interest in. "Prepare to land," Avarice ordered, "and bring them both back. Alive, back in the bunker." Jason stared at the blinking light. He turned to Javira with a heavy sigh. "We're out of time," he said. She nodded, already strapping her blade back on. Then we faced them together. They didn't know what was waiting outside. They didn't know how many soldiers, drones, or monsters would come. But they stepped out of the bunker anyway, side by side, weapons in hand. Hearts burning with purpose, and far above, watching from a secure room, Lord Craven whispered to himself, "They survived the wilds. Now, let's see if they survive." My army, smoke curled from the edge of Jason's jacket as he stepped through the flames. Ash fell like snow, and the ground was littered with metal pieces and broken armor. Behind him, a burning drone spun in its death coil. Ahead of him, Javira stood with her blade drawn, eyes sharp. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The rescue team had not come to save them. It had come to capture them. And now the forest was a battlefield. Jason's gun was almost empty, and his legs barely moved. But something in him had changed. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing his ground. They found shelter inside a crushed gunship, half buried in a crater. Javira patched his shoulder. Her hands stained red. He didn't even flinch. Outside, the soldiers regrouped, forming tight ranks. General Averis barked orders through a loudspeaker. "Surrender the girl, and we will spare the human." Jason looked at Javira and shook his head. "I'll never let them take you," he said. She smiled. Tired, but proud. "Good," she said, "because I'm not going back." They stepped out of the broken ship together. All eyes turned toward them, weapons raised. Then something happened that no one expected. Jason raised both hands, but not in surrender. He shouted across the battlefield, "You want me? You'll have to go through me first." A few soldiers hesitated. They had seen what this human did in training, in battle, in the wilds. They had heard whispers about his strength, his speed, his heart, and some of them began to lower their siptasa, and some of them began to lower their siptasa, and leaves a rich, long-lasting color. They had seen what this human Cain's lost him live. They had seen what this human did intact. And what might do, we had build us, we might see. We had made us bid. I see it as bid K lib, by Surat, but we see it Kawai it. Guns, a shot rang out not from Jason, not from the army, from the ridge above. Where a new ship had landed, a deep voice echoed from the sky. "Enough," it said. Everyone turned. A figure stepped down from the ramp, long cape flowing. Face hidden under a steel mask, it was him, Lord Craven. Javira's breath caught in her throat. Jason narrowed his eyes. Craven walked between his soldiers without a word. Like a ghost through fire, he stopped just a few feet from Jason. The silence hurt more than any weapon. Jason spoke first. "This is how you test me," he asked, his voice cracked but firm. Craven looked at him for a long time. "You're still alive," he said quietly. Jason didn't blink. "I had a reason to survive." Craven turned to his daughter. "You disobeyed me," he said. "I followed my heart," she answered. Craven's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "And now you bring war to my men?" Javira raised her chin. "No, father. You brought the war to us." Before another word could be said, the ground shook. Sirens wailed. The skies darkened. A massive shadow passed overhead. Everyone looked up. An enemy dreadnought was descending covered in blood-red markings. One of the soldiers shouted, "It's the Scourge fleet, they've returned." Panic rippled through the ranks. Craven turned to Jason. Eyes sharp. "You know their tactics," he said. "You trained with the Legion." Jason looked at him in disbelief. "You want me to lead your army now?" "I want you to lead them to survive," Craven said. Jason looked at the frightened soldiers, at Javira, and at the sky full of death. Then he nodded. "Fine," he said, "but we do it my way." Within minutes, Jason took command. He split The troops into fast squads told them to fall back to the canyon and set traps. He didn't bark orders like a general, he spoke like someone who had bled beside them. And they listened. Javira stayed by his side. Moving like wind through the battlefield, Jason used broken ships, energy cables, and fallen drones to build an explosive trap. The Scourge dropped troops, massive beasts with armor like tanks. Jason waited until they stepped into the canyon, then he gave the signal. The canyon lit up with fire. The enemies screamed, blasted apart in a storm of burning light. The rest of the army pushed forward with new courage. Alien soldiers followed Jason's charge, screaming his name. He led them straight into the chaos. And somehow they pushed the Scourge back. At the end, Jason stood in the ash once again, but this time he wasn't alone. Yavira stood beside him, and behind them, the entire army. Craven walked forward slowly, the smoke parting before him. He looked at Jason with something strange in his eyes. Respect. You led them, Craven said. Jason nodded. Too tired to speak, and they followed. They needed hope, Jason whispered. Craven turned to the others and raised his arm. This human, he said, is no longer just a soldier. He is a symbol. And in that moment, the army bowed, not to Craven, but to the human who had saved them. Jason looked at Javira, who smiled through tears. No more running, no more hiding. They had earned their place, together. The metal slipped from Jason's hand and hit the table with a soft clink. He stared at it like it meant nothing, because to him, it didn't. Not compared to her, outside the Great War Hall. Thousands of voices cheered. His name echoed through the air, chanted by alien warriors and humans alike. Jason the brave, Jason the survivor, Jason the unbroken. He should have felt proud. But all he wanted was to see her face. The doors opened slowly, and there she was. Javira stood in a flowing gown of deep silver. The same color as her eyes, but her smile was the same. Simple and warm. Jason stood up fast, his chair falling behind him. He crossed the floor, not caring who watched. She met him halfway, wrapping her arms around him like they were alone in the universe. I thought you might run again, she whispered. I ran straight to you, he replied. Behind them, the hall filled with silence. All eyes turned to the tall figure walking slowly toward them. Lord Craven, still in his dark armor, but without his helmet. For the first time, Jason saw his face, sharp lines, gray skin, tired eyes, and a scar across one cheek. A warrior's face, a father's face. He stopped in front of Jason and Javira. The silence held like glass. Then Craven held out something small, Jason's old Earth Dog tag, worn and scratched. Jason took it carefully. Confused, Craven said nothing for a moment. Then, with a voice heavy like stone, he spoke. You came here with nothing. You stood against beasts, soldiers, and even me. You earned my army's respect, and, he paused, looking at his daughter. You earned something more difficult, her love. Jason looked at him in shock. Craven continued. I sent you to war to break you, but you didn't break. You became something I couldn't stop. He stepped aside and nodded slowly. Then let it be known, he said, voice loud and clear. My daughter has chosen her mate. And I do not object. The room shook with applause. Alien commanders pounded their fists against their chests. Warriors shouted. Yavira gripped Jason's hand, eyes bright with joy. Jason didn't care about medals or ranks or legends. He had one thing now, her, but peace was not forever. The galaxy still burned in many corners. The Scourge might return, or something worse. Jason knew it wouldn't be an easy life, but he had stopped running from hard things long ago. 1 week later, a new ship stood ready on the launch pad. Sleek, fast, armed with both human and alien. Tech Jason stood at the ramp, adjusting his jacket. Javira walked beside him in her new armor lighter, stronger and designed by both worlds. They had a new mission now: to protect the peace they fought for. As the engines roared to life, Craven appeared at the edge of the platform. He raised one arm in salute. Jason returned it without hesitation. 2 soldiers now. 2 enemies turned family. The ship lifted in 2. The sky disappearing into the stars. On the control screen, Javira entered new coordinates. Jason leaned back, smiling. "Where to next?" he asked. She smirked. "Somewhere we can save and still kiss in peace." Jason laughed. And the stars welcomed them forward. A human and an alien girl, born on different worlds, shaped by fire. Now writing a future neither one of them expected, together.